Welcome back to another edition of the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum podcast. And now here's your host, Don Reeves.
Of all our podcasts from here at the National Cowboy Museum, this segment is certain to put a smile on your face. Baxter Black is back at the National Cowboy Museum. This is his first performance here in 3 years. We're glad to have him. I just wanted to say thanks for letting us barge into your backstage dressing room for this interview.
I'm hoping this will lend some credibility to my career.
Countless fans have bought your books, read your weekly newspaper column, listened to you on radio, watched you on RFD TV now.
Yeah, danced with me occasionally.
Now they can learn more about your roots from your recent book, Lessons from a Desperado Poet. And they're going to learn more about the roots in your life.
Coincidentally, I wrote this. Oh, sorry. I'm a marketing person because anybody who makes a living outside the box, you know, where you can't go to a banker and borrow money. I've never been able, I don't know anything because you can never borrow money. And what do you do, son? You want to borrow $100,000 to build a home? What's your occupation? Poet. What? Well, cowboy poet. And then it really goes to the bottom. No, so you have to learn to work outside the box. And so I wrote Lessons from a Desperado Poet. And I got a great fellow named Wilford Brimley to write the foreword. And he did pretty good. I dictated it to him. But I get to write about what he was. The only thing I'll tell you about it, where it has come in use I can see already, is that there are lots of entertainers at my stage who never had a hit song on the radio or, you know, that they strive for and never got to be anything but an extra in the movies. And so those are people that Random House is not going to publish, you know, especially if they're writing poetry. Or, you know, Columbia Records is not going to hire you if you're from Idaho. So this is how I got where I was, and I had a few lessons in here. But somehow I came up with the description of what I learned working for this Basco who was running the livestock division up there in Idaho that I was working for. And one of the things he did, I can remember the first time, I'd been there, a day actually. And I was overcome with the responsibility. You know, they had 5 ranches, 10,000 cows, 3 feedlots, 100,000 cattle on feed, 20,000 sheep. You know, we built a 1,000-cow dairy, feed stores, grain stores, and I have all this. We had 300 horses on this outfit, and I was the vet, and I was taking care of them. Yes. And I thought, gosh, I hope I'm up to it. And he walks in the door the second day. He comes into this back room they called my office, and he had a little manila folder, and he threw it on the desk and said, "Take care of this too." And I opened it up, and on each page there was one little paragraph, and it said, you know, potatoes 85% grain, this supplement, and this much hay. And the next one was ration number 2 and number 3. Take care of this too. Now, where I had come from in the Southwest, you could actually go to school to be a feedlot person. You know, they actually had a chain of command. They had meetings. and the last outfit I had come from was the Diamond A down there and started in Roswell. They had a whole division of feed managers and people who worked all this out. Now we had one nutritionist, Kenneth Ing, who was a good guy, and he would fly in every 6 weeks, and the boss would see him land the plane down there at the feedlot, and the boss would go pick him up, and he'd take him by the office so he could call all the people that he had just talked to previously at the other feedlots, and then they'd go to Mountain Home, spend 2 hours having a martini lunch. Then they'd drive back. He'd take him to the office where he could call everybody where he was going to go, and then he'd take him to the plane. And I'm thinking, I'm down there in the doctor chute, with the Cowboys, and I've got my thermometer up a coccidiosis calf, and there's stuff running off my sleeve, and I've got a big slash across my face, and I'm looking up there, and I said, well, why don't they take me to lunch? I'm a professional person too. So anyway, he dumps this thing on my lap and says, take care of this, will you? And I was stunned. I mean, he never asked me if I'd taken a course in nutrition, if I'd ever run a mill, or if I'd ever drove a feed truck. He just said, take care of it. He made no assumptions. Well, I shouldn't say that. It didn't concern him. That was going to be my job. And I guess one of my first lessons I learned working for him was, you will be surprised how capable people think you are if they don't know you well. Don't waste that advantage.
Now they can learn more about your roots from your recent book, Lessons from a Desperado Poet. How'd you describe that book? It's part biography, part self-help book, and part cowboy philosophy.
Well, on public radio, I objected to their term using me as cowboy poet, former large animal veterinarian, and philosopher, because I don't think of myself as a philosopher. But you can think up stuff. That's my job, to think up stuff. And that's what I do for a living. That's what I'm doing right now. And it's all going through here just like this. It's just like
You had a long relationship with Bob Edwards at National Public Radio. And how did that affect your career and build your audience?
You have to concede right off the bat, I didn't belong there in the first place. And once you concede that, then everything makes sense. In the book tells the story of me and NPR, but we listened to public radio because we didn't have a television when Cindy and I got married. And I said, do you want to get a television? She said, no, I don't want to. So we never had one. So radio became our source of news, and we were living in Colorado. And public radio, obviously, was one of the things we listened to. And I remember the year that Yellowstone burned, 1988. And I'm listening to this NPR, and it doesn't even know what's happening, and we're in Colorado, and there's smoke and it's Wyoming and Montana's on fire, and the smoke's covering us in Colorado. So that was my inspiration. So I sent them a poem. I hunted up their address. I didn't know them, didn't have a clue. Hunted up their address and sent it to them. And I go through the whole list of what ifs that even got them to open the envelope, and then somebody actually had to listen to it, and it was a poem about fire and drought, and so however they got through to that point, somebody called and said, we got this poem. Did you write this? I said, yeah. Can we air it? I said, well, sure. I'd be thrilled. And they aired it, and they called back and said, you got anything else? And I had a mountain of it already. That's how I got on public radio. That simple. I have a TV show right now. It's running on RFD TV, and it's a little 2.5-minute commentary or story. But the first person I sent it to was Charles Osgood. And he actually called the house. And he said, my producer just doesn't think you're our cup of tea. I'll tell you one thing Bob Edwards told me. He wrote a book about Edward R. Murrow. And I had got my first Random House book somewhere along the way, and I called him up and I said, and they had given me an advance. And I said, gosh, Bob, I don't think I'll be able to pay that advance back. He said, listen, if you ever are able to pay your advance back, get a new agent.
Baxter, do you think public radio helped you bridge that country to city gap?
It gave me an urban audience. But what it did was it meant that people in New York City and Washington, D.C. which is basically NPR, recognized my name. And that's how they knew. And it was, I think, one of the reasons that I got Random House published 4 books of mine, which is a thrill. You know, that was a big deal. And then I went on Johnny Carson, but it didn't have anything to do with public radio. It was another story. But
one of the lessons from your recent book states, success depends on the willingness to make a decision. Do you recall a significant decision that greatly affected your career?
I can remember I fought tooth and nail, clawed to be on the Johnny Carson show. And then the Cowboy Poetry came along, and they called me up, and they said, they've given us your name. And I knew who they were. I'd been talking to them. And they said, are you a real cowboy? I said, no, I'm a real cowboy poet. I said, I'm not a cowpuncher, I'm an ex-veterinarian. And well, that's not who we want. So, and 2 years went by. And then finally they called up, and of course I didn't quit bugging them. And they finally called up and they said, are you ready? Meaning, have you learned your lesson? We will decide whether you are on the air or not. And I said, I am ready. And I was humble and went on. And then I'd been on 3 or 4 times, and then they called and said, Johnny wants you on more often. I said, how would you feel if I told you I didn't want to be on more often? And that's another one of the deals where the guy on the other end of the phone, I could say him thinking, are you an idiot? What is the matter with you? I'm trying to make you famous. And I said, I can come on your show in January every year. I can give you the absolute best of what I've got. I told him television eats people like me alive. So that's what it does. I could be on once a year. They reran it every time in June, and every time I turned around, somebody would say, hey, just saw you on Johnny Carson.
You've chosen Coyote Cowboy Company as the name of your publishing and entertainment empire. Among my Native American friends, the coyote is known as a trickster, and within the Western business community, a scoundrel is often known as a coyote. How'd you settle on the name Coyote Cowboy Company?
So that's interesting. No one's ever asked me that question. I will tell you this, over and over, I have wished that I'd called it Baxter Black, Inc. And I recommend that to all my friends. Why did you name yourself the floating Indian guide? No one can find you. Why are you trying to hide yourself? And the worst mix-ups we had, especially in Denver, was the prostitutes association is called Coyotes, and we'd get their calls, and I assume they'd get mine.
Was it lucrative?
Not too much for me. We just referred them on. That's a good question, because I did name it, but I named it with that in mind, the Coyote. We're going to be a little bit out here. It ain't going to be the normal way. Coyote. He's a coyote.
And you can stand in the canyon's cathedral where water and sky never rest, and know in your bones that the meek on their own will never inherit the West. It's big and it's wild and it's lonesome. The dream of first blood still survives, and it beckons to those who can bid adios to the comfort of 8 to 5 lives. So come, all you brave caballeros, reach down inside till you feel the heat, and then take a deep seat. 'Cause the West, boys, she ain't broke to ride.
This podcast is a companion to the museum's membership publication, Persimmon Hill Magazine. It's a great resource for keeping in touch with our Western heritage. Visit nationalcowboymuseum.org for details. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.